That's okay, it's a story you can cry about. We support you in that. So our narrative lectionary begins today not with the story of creation in Genesis, but with the story of destruction. The story where the earth is buried and drowned under the waters of a divine flood is part of our story, and we have to remember our entire story, not just the happy parts. If we want to live authentic lives open to transformation, we have to live into our whole story, as Victor talked about last week with the 139th Psalm. And chaos and destruction are part of our story. The divine destruction in the flood is a response to the destruction and evil caused by humanity. God created the world to be good and beautiful and a place of justice and peace. And humanity, on the other hand, seemed hell-bent on destruction from the moment we were left alone in the garden. We haven't even gotten to the 10th chapter of our story. It's telling that by so soon in our story, God's people have strayed so far from God's hope for them that major changes have to be made. The earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh. In this story, the evil hearts of humanity are contrasted with God's heart, which is grieved. The same word used for grieved here is used to describe the pain that Eve bears when she gives birth. 6 chapters into our story, and humanity has contributed to evil and pain, and we have broken God's heart. In the first chapter of his letter to the church in Rome, Paul writes, people exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and they worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator. This seems to sum up well the challenge of humanity as told in Genesis. We forget our relationship to the created world and our relationship with the one who created us. And it's easy to read this story and wonder if God is vengeful. I mean, God buries the earth in water deeper than the top of Mount Everest, after all. All of humanity is wiped out. All of the earth is wiped out, wiped clean. But a close reading of this text reminds us that this is the story of a loving God, a God who doubles down on their promise to be in relationship with a humanity that has broken their heart and that has forgotten to be God's. Creation begins again with the people in the ark, people who were just normal people. There's nothing perfect about Noah or his family. Noah is referred to as blameless in his generation, but some commentators point out that his generation wasn't that great, right? I mean, they're the ones that led God to flood the earth in the first place. And Noah's going to have some trouble himself the minute he gets off the boat. Noah is not a perfect man, but maybe he's perfect in his human imperfection, and that's good news for us, right? God is not looking for perfect people. God is looking for actual people with whom to be in a covenant relationship. God recommits to humanity. This first biblical covenant is all about God putting limits on how God will be in relationship with us from here on out. The limits are set on God, not on humanity, not on God's creation, but on God's own behavior. I read the news today, of course, and I'm struck by how humanity still seems pretty hell-bent on destruction. There's war and violence and hatred directed toward each other instead of love and acceptance. Humanity has not, it seems, changed that much. Thankfully, God did, promising with a bow in the clouds to forever be more inherently connected to us. God binds God's self in a covenant that shows us the depth and the height and the width of God's love toward us. Now, I know the waters subsided and Noah's boat found land, but I confess that recent years have felt like maybe we were still on a boat, right? Floating over the surface of creation, waiting to find land, mourning the destruction we have wrought, the loss we have endured, the regrets we cannot address. 40 days and 40 nights of rain falling and falling and falling and falling. Looking out the windows of the boat and seeing the known landmarks of our lives sink under the rising tide of the deluge, leaving us in an unfamiliar seascape with no way to get our bearings, no sense of where the ship is headed, because the rain clouds even block out the lodestars by which we navigate our world. So what do you do in this time of waiting? After you've tended to the animals on the Lido deck, of course, the flood is a Sabbath of sorts. And I think the world we've been in since I moved here 2 years ago has been in a Sabbath flood time as well. This is the first normal-ish homecoming worship service we've had since I've been here. We've been in this time of waiting and pondering and recognizing that, thank God, we're all still alive, even as everything we know has changed, right? This has been a time to pause and wonder about our role in the mess we see around us. It's been a time of waiting, and I'm so sick of waiting, and I know you are too. All of that waiting time when you don't think you can ponder one more thing or take one more, lesson to be learned, and the rain stops. The silence on the tin roof of the ark must have been deafening after that long fortnight of rain. And it takes a long time for that much rainfall to subside. And after the rain stops, Noah sends birds out to look for land. The raven goes out first and flies and finds nothing. The dove is released the next week. She doesn't find land either. She returns to the ark, grateful to find a place to rest. They wait another week, send the dove again, and this time it comes back with an olive leaf. 7 more days, the dove gets sent again, and this time the dove does not return. She has found a new life and a new start. She no longer needs the shelter of the ark or the confinement of the ark. I've been thinking of those birds this week and the supreme act of hope and faith involved in sending them out from the ark. When all you can see around you is water, when everything you know is gone, and yet you have faith that this time of trial, this devastating flood is going to subside. What an act of faith to believe in land when all you can see is water. It takes time, though, for that faith and that hope to be rewarded with signs of life. We've been waiting for more than weeks for these COVID floodwaters to subside. And we're now at the time when we can leave our proverbial ark, when we can go back out into the world where we no longer need the shelter of quarantine the same way we did. I've heard the Noah story my whole life, but it wasn't until hearing it now, after the pandemic, that I wondered if people maybe were hesitant to leave the ark. Right? I mean, I had always assumed that the minute the gangplank went down, they would have raced out of that boat. Get me away from those stinky animals. I cannot wait to get away from everybody else's smells and noises and needs. Even the animals, I assumed, would have wanted to get away from each other. The prey could not have been too relaxed, penned in near the predator. If I'm a wildebeest, I don't want to look over and see lions licking their lips and planning dinner. But now I wonder, and I don't know about you, but I've felt a lot of conflicting emotions as I've tried to walk out of my proverbial COVID shutdown ark. Yay, I get to be around people again. Heck, I have to be around people again. And both are valid responses. Being here with you at Calvary, going to Warriors games, having dinner with friends, traveling to see family, traveling to see the world, all of those things have brought me so much joy in my life in the past year. And with that joy has come anxiety I never used to have. Am I safe? Should I be doing this? I really thought that when I went down and joined 1 million people at the parade after the Warriors championship. Should I be doing this? What is the risk right now? Is this a place I want to be wearing my mask, or does it feel safe to take it off? And I suspect Noah's family had similar concerns as they stood by that open door of the ark with the land before them. Yay, land! Wait, is this safe? When God says the world was destroyed, what does that mean exactly? Will my house or my yoga studio or my church still be standing? Am I going to have to rebuild every single thing? Is everyone really dead? What are we going to find when we leave this boat? The animals might have had anxiety too. Did the wildebeest wonder, is the lion going to get me the minute I get off this ship? Did the lion wonder, Do I still have what it takes? Has all this time being fed on the ark taken away my hunting skills? How am I going to feed my cubs if I don't remember how to hunt? Like Noah's family and like the animals, we've been living with a level of anxiety and worry the past few years that I don't know that we've recognized the toll it has taken on our bodies and on our minds and on our spirits. So I invite you right now to pause and to close your eyes, to unclench anything you may be clenching, to settle into your seat, to breathe. Just breathe in and hold it for longer than you would normally breathe. And breathe out and breathe it all out. Breathe in. Breathe out. And notice. Whatever you notice and observe is okay. If you're calm, or if you're jangly, or if you're worried, or if you're at peace, or if you're some combination of the above, it's been a season. Looking for dry land in the middle of a flood is exhausting work. So the question is, how can we build community here at Calvary to support each other while we figure out how to leave the ark and return out into the world? How can we hold hope for each other when we forget what dry land looked like, when we remember only the destruction? Because ultimately, we are hope people. I've preached about this before, but our faith calls us to recognize despair when we experience it, but to see despair as a way station on our journey, not the place we stop. We are hope people. We worship a God who chose to become one of us and who conquered death itself with the power of love. Our faith calls us to look for land when all we see is water. So how can we be hope people together as the COVID ark settles onto dry land and we move out into this new and unknown, familiar and unfamiliar world? The story of Noah's Ark is often used to decorate children's nurseries and children's Bibles. And while the story has a happy ending, it's a gruesome story to make a children's song about. The Lord said to Noah, there's going to be a floody, right? We shouldn't be happy when we're singing that song, right? But I'm going to continue to defend its use for children because of the most important lesson in the story. God had the animals on the ark go in pairs. Nobody was alone in their anxiety, whether human or wildebeest or lion. Everybody had a partner to get them through it. And this is the lesson I want the children and all of us to remember when we remember this story. We are not alone in this life. And I'm not talking about spouses, although a spouse can be one of your support people. I'm talking about family and friends and counselors and teachers and the stranger at the grocery store who reaches up to the tall shelf to get the pickles that you can't quite reach. We are not alone. And when we feel alone, when despair and worry seem to separate us from each other, then maybe the sign of the rainbow in the sky can remind us to reach out for help. Because we are not meant to face the anxiety of this life by ourselves. God sent the animals 2 by 2. So Calvary, here's the question. Are we ready to leave the ark? Are we ready to strengthen the community we've known and to extend it to others? Are we willing to commit to the work of engaging our faith journey along the way? Are we ready to volunteer our time to support our Matthew 25 partners, to worship here together in person, to spend time in fellowship and play? I know there are a lot of pressures on our time and our talents. But I also know that meaningful community matters and is worth the commitment of our time to create it, to cultivate it, to enjoy it. So when you see a rainbow in the clouds and when you remember how God made a promise to change God's own behavior on our behalf, maybe it can also remind us about the way we want to live together when we leave the ark. God doesn't promise humanity will change. God doesn't promise that evil will vanish or that life will be easy, but God promises to be with us and for us in the midst of it all, and God sends us out to be with and for each other in the midst of it all. The rainbow is God's promise that God will remember the covenant that flows from the broken heart of God, a promise of presence, of relationship, of life, and of hope. a promise born out of the vulnerability of God who was willing to fall in love again with humanity and willing to endure the pain of yet another broken heart. So how can we be reminders of that for each other when we're afraid to leave the safety of our isolation? Because it's easy to see the destruction of the flood, but it takes faith to look for land. And I'm grateful that we get to do that work together. Let's go explore this new world we've been given together. Amen.